Shalom, y'all. This is Chutzpah and Soul talking. And here's the story. What would happen if you took chutzpah and married it to soul? So everything we do is going to be laced with satire and irony, parody, and all of it is going to be in the service of truth and beauty, of standing up to the dominant culture through first-person stories and rants and essays and dialogues and group catharsis. Join us. We're on all the stations. You're going to love it. Shalom, y'all. I'm Johnny Golden. A few nights ago, I got a visit from an apparition in the middle of the night. And it wasn't scary. It was very, very comforting because it was none other than Uncle Sal, the Italian uncle, the angel of interventions. And he talked to me about a number of things, but at the very end he said, Johnny boy, been listening to Chutzpah and Soul, love it, really love it. But I noticed not enough paisanos, not enough of my guys on. It's time, don't you think? We had some Italian Americans on the show. So I woke up the next morning, I don't even know if I remembered, but somehow this next episode number 5, 3 guests, all Italian American. Go figure. It means that on all levels, Uncle Sal, the Italian uncle, is the angel of interventions. Today's show, the theme is doing good and feeling good. We got 3 guys, 3 paisanos, 3 Italian Americans from 3 generations, all living in the Boston area. First one, Chris, is a guy in IT, but he's doing good in a lot of other ways. He grew up in Howard Beach, Queens, New York, and he's ended up in Boston. Dialogue with Chris, a millennial, was an effort by me to bridge the gaps. Some of the times it bridged, some of the times it diverged. But it's definitely entertaining, and you'll hear where we disagree and where we semi-agree. Then we got Paul, who's total idealist, total spiritual guy, and an idealistic entrepreneur. And then the last and oldest and not least at all, Arthur, an attorney, an intense social worker, helping people at the deepest, darkest levels of dysfunction. All right, I have Chris Bonacontri, which means good encounters. Not of the third kind. I think he's got good encounters of the second kind. And Chris is a friend of mine and an acquaintance of mine, acquaintance from Toastmasters in Boston. He's in the millennial generation. We've established that. And he's originally from New York City, from Queens. I've gotten to know him. And he's definitely into logic and logical reasoning.
Oh, yeah. So there's this famous incident, the Howard Beach incident, that it's a very Italian neighborhood, and it was a very racist neighborhood. It's featured in Goodfellas, for example. And there was a group of black kids came into the neighborhood, and a group of Italian 20-somethings chased them out of the neighborhood onto the Belt Parkway, and one of them was hit and killed. And this was a huge incident. I think Al Sharpton type.
Oh yeah.
Protests going on around the city.
Did they actually come out to your area too and protest?
I believe so. I don't know. There's a Chris Rock show episode in which he comes to Howard Beach.
Really?
And trying to get them to rename the main boulevard in the town Tupac Shakur Boulevard.
Oh,
that's kind of a way of.
He was doing it as a humorous.
Right, because he knows it's such a racist neighborhood. And it's a pretty funny bit. But yeah, so that was the legacy, of the neighborhood, and I think it's faded a little bit over time.
Yeah. Did you or anybody in your family know anybody who was killed on 9/11 in New York City?
Sure. My father is a firefighter,
Oh,
and he happened to be away at the time of 9/11.
I think you told me that.
Yeah,
Keep going.
I may have mentioned this.
You did. Keep going.
He was upstate at the time, but I mean, he was just, from what he told me after, he was just pacing back in front of the TV, just wishing he was there, because he was seeing, and hearing too, all the people he knew, all the firefighters he knew, just rushing. And that day too, you remember. I remember even as far out in Queens, you would just hear sirens every few minutes of people coming from all over the suburbs and Long Island, even just driving toward the city. Either the first day of sophomore year of high school for me, or
Right.
one of the earliest days.
You were at school already. Yeah.
I was in high school on the Upper East Side. It was where my high school was, and my uncle worked downtown. As soon as he saw what was going on,
Was he a firefighter too?
no, my uncle is an electrician,
Okay.
and he was on a job somewhere downtown, and he saw what was going on, either from the street or from a rooftop or whatever, and he's like, I got to get out of here. So he found my aunt, picked her up. She worked downtown. They drove uptown, picked me up, the Upper East Side. We drove over Triborough Bridge, and at that point, I remember going to the bridge, and you could see the towers. And then we just, went back to Queens, to Howard Beach, and it was a hell of a day. I mean,
And your father must have known.
my father knew lots of people that passed away, right? Lots of firefighters
Who were
that
killed.
drove, or from houses out even as far in Brooklyn, Queens, that they went into the buildings and they were killed.
I look at you, Chris. You're a really
Yeah.
good-looking guy. You're
Oh.
really smart.
Thank you, John.
You're very. You come from a rooted background. Strong roots and everything. You've got, definitely intellectual self-confidence for sure. Okay. So, in a different era, somebody would have made you mayor by now. Now I'm kind of joking, but you'd be like really, you would be fending off women. You'd be fending off.
You think?
Yeah.
Huh, okay.
In a different era. You'd be
Interesting.
hanging out with Frank and Sammy and the whole group. Not exactly, but what was that called again?
The Rat Pack.
The Rat Pack. You'd be hanging out with the Rat Pack. You'd be in
hanging out with the
Vegas.
Rat Pack.
You'd be in Vegas. You'd be at the Bada Bing Club. But you'd be doing really well, and like you'd be fending up. And I think there's so much that's
Bada
been
Bing Club. That's great.
there's been so much that's been undermining for male leadership in this country.
So you think this is a part of the zeitgeist you're talking to,
Yes.
some sort of social movement that is undermining male leadership?
Not
in a
exactly
way?
social movement, the social psychology of the moment.
I don't like to make excuses like that. Like, maybe true, maybe not, but regardless, it is what it is, and I'm not
But
going
not
to
an
blame the
excuse.
zeitgeist for any, for me not being at the Bada Bing Club. I mean, if I want to go to the Bada Bing Club, I should just make that a goal and figure it out.
The only thing I can think of is that, which is something that would transcend the zeitgeist, is the fact that you're very sensitive, and so am I. So, being that sensitive and being aware of it as early as fourth grade, and I know that that's about the exact same time I was at a summer camp, and they showed a movie, and I think it was a movie, I think it was a documentary or something of Benny Goodman, the famous jazz clarinetist.
Mm-hmm.
It was a Jewish camp. And I cried about something. I can't remember why, but I've always cried at movies. And I think I was the only kid, it was a boys' co-ed camp, but I was in a boys' cabin or something. And I remember feeling out of place and feeling alienated right away after the film because I was crying and nobody else was, or I had cried,
Okay.
So it's sensitive, and I think, so any of us throughout history who are sensitive in that way, emotionally sensitive, do have some obstacles that other people don't. Have you ever felt alienated in a social situation?
Have I ever felt alienated? Yes,
Okay.
I've definitely felt alienated.
Okay.
Sure.
So a lot of that could be the lack of
Yeah.
receiving the kind of thing you put out. You're a sensitive guy, and you put out the idea that you'd like to receive some sensitivity back, and it's just one possibility.
Yeah, I
And
think
if you
I think
get
you have
back-
an idea in your head though that I don't know if it's necessarily.
I'm just
I don't know if
asking.
it resonates.
Okay, so what-
this
what-
idea
what-
that I'm going through life and looking to connect with people, and that I'm this sensitive, empathetic guy that, feels alienated because these people aren't necessarily receptive. I don't think that's the case at all.
Okay. It's just an idea.
It's an interesting idea.
Yeah. I'm running it up the flagpole.
Yeah. No, I
Okay.
appreciate that.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
do you see, is that a description of yourself in a way?
Yeah, definitely for myself. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So I wasn't trying to project because I know we think differently quite a bit.
That's fine.
Right.
But so tell me a little bit about that. So you feel in a way alienated in that you try to form connections with people and it's not necessarily.
Right. I think the big thing that affected me, but it probably would have happened anyway, but was moving at the age of 15 from Maryland outside of D.C. to a tiny, very, very insensitive town north of Boston.
Yeah.
And being the only outsider, the only new kid in the entire school system. So that's just one example. You read The Catcher in the Rye, I'm sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
How much?
One of my favorite books.
Okay, talk about that.
Talk about The Catcher in the Rye?
Yeah, because you remember, you heard my segment called Italian Uncle, and I said Uncle Sal was like the catcher in the rye. He was the guy who can intervene to help parents with kids. And the catcher in the rye was that abstract idea of somebody preventing kids from falling over the cliff or something like
There's
that.
another layer to it, too.
Go ahead.
Which is, I think, in The Catcher in the Rye, it's this man or this adolescent struggling with becoming a man who has this need, this sort of rebellious need against what he sees as the common social structure, social fabric, to be this catcher in the rye, to save these people.
Right.
But that in itself is a little bit of or maybe more than a little bit, it's a psychological abnormality. In a way, it's a analyzing the book, where is he telling the story from? Is he institutionalized at the end?
Yeah.
Is he sort of reflecting from, a bad place, it seems like?
Right, but he's totally alienated. I mean, from the very beginning, he's talking about those schmucks at the school, right? Who pissed him off, right?
I think in a way, I guess my point is that, looking at someone who wants to be a catcher in the rye, and, I think that from Holden Caulfield's point of view, that's an ideal. You want to be someone who's a savior, who's going out, and I think that's something I would like to be. And I try to be in different aspects of my life. But I think that looking at it from him trying to be this catcher in the rye, but in the context of his struggling with development and maybe with mental illness, or the mental illness caused by this inability to fit into social mold.
Right. Well, he's not
shows a darker side to being a catcher in the rye. It shows that it's a deviation in a way, right?
But you're making, I don't know, I think you're thinking about whether he's a hero or not. He's definitely an anti-hero, And,
sure.
And the catcher thing was, he was thinking about his sister, I think. Wasn't he thinking about his younger sister?
To save her from the fuck yous that are written in the stairwell.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, I think anybody who, like yourself, who identified with that book a lot, or got a lot out of that book, which I did too, probably has some sense about how alienating systems can be, or a school can be, or a group of people, or being bullied or something, or being a gang, or people who didn't treat you right. So I mean, being misunderstood is a big deal, especially as a kid. I mean, every teenager type novel and movie, every coming of age movie that you can think of, had a main character who's misunderstood.
Sure.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Well,
I'm thinking of Stand By Me, for example, the Stephen King thing that was turned into.
Yeah, it's a good movie.
A great movie. So the main character is definitely misunderstood by his parents, I think, and his brother and stuff. But the guys on the trip, they see him as the leader, the storyteller, the articulate one.
Yeah.
You remember? And I could see you doing that role. I see you in that woods in Maine, sitting around the campfire, 3 other guys.
Maybe.
You're telling the stories, and people are liking it. A lot of people feel chronically misunderstood. Many, many people feel chronically misunderstood. And they do say it as a mission to talk about it. because they don't want to be misunderstood. But they don't perceive it in the way you're talking about. They don't perceive it that there's a fair playing field. Because if people feel misunderstood, feel they have a lot of obstacles that are not fair.
Yeah, well, then maybe they do. Their life is hard.
Yeah, but they don't feel there's a fair playing field. We don't have. I mean, that's a construct that exists in some small, specific settings. But overall, there's no society yet that has operated in that kind of way at all. And so we have a lot of randomness. And as a result, people get dealt a deck of cards that can be extremely unfair. And so it's not a fair playing field in the sense that if they try to put out why they feel misunderstood, are they going to be heard? Probably not, unless they have some movement behind them or something. I love you to critique it.
I think that life isn't fair. And I
Okay.
think that it's that people need to understand themselves
Okay.
and the cards that they're dealt and make goals, figure out ways to get to where they want to be.
There are many systems, such as school systems, such as corporate systems, such as all kinds of systems where somebody is going to be marginalized, scapegoated, bullied, and made to feel alienated. And it happens throughout history, throughout all societies. And the thing that I'm saying is that one of the major things, one aspect of countering that is art, literature. The artistic impulse is to counter that because most artists have suffered on some level, that stuff, and they see the world through an angle. They don't see it inside of it. They see it outside from an angle. Almost every creative artist of every kind, okay, from Lenny Bruce to Michelangelo, all right, they see life through an angle, or Van Gogh, whatever, okay? So art and creativity and empathy are a number of things that can challenge that. And so I don't think any of what I said is a big leap at all. I think it's pretty much common knowledge of educated people.
I don't know what you're referring to as a big leap or not. I don't.
Well, I think it's common knowledge.
That all of what you said you think is common knowledge?
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm not surprised you think that because you just said it. And you tend to project a lot onto people around you, thinking that they think the same way you do.
No, but if you read stuff about
To your point, I agree. I think that the two are related. I think that people that tend to be marginalized within systems, sometimes they do go on to channel that and produce art. But I think that's not necessarily a prerequisite for art. I think that art in itself is just an application of productivity and productive human energy, sometimes through the lens of suffering or through overcoming adversity, calcifies it and makes it all the stronger or amplifies it in a way.
Well, so there were two major points I made. One was that there's lots of systems that make somebody a scapegoat or a group of people a scapegoat, have them feel alienated, have them scapegoated, have them marginalized. That there's almost no system that doesn't do that, is what I'm saying. That's common knowledge.
Maybe.
That's common knowledge.
I don't know. Yeah, I guess I'll agree with you. Yeah,
It's so
social
common
systems tend to have people that are, in groups and out groups,
Yeah.
the haves and the have-nots.
That's right.
Sure.
Yeah, and it's so common knowledge that even those institutions have been in the more progressive or more enlightened sectors of the world,
Yeah.
okay, are now trying to do something about it. They're trying to counter that tendency, all right?
Okay.
The second inductive reasoning generalization was that most artists,
But where does the inductive reasoning come in? Like, what are you talking about?
that if you look at a specific about somebody being alienated, Holden Caulfield, at a private school, at a boarding school.
He's a fictional character.
I know, but it's not based on a fantasy. It's not science fiction. It's not, it's based on real life.
So you're saying because Holden Caulfield
There's been a
exists
million.
in this story,
No, there's been a million.
Means that
Man, there's been
systems
a
all
million
over.
films
Look, I'm not
of
disagreeing
private boarding
with you
schools.
That there are systems.
Well, Christ,
in
have you
place
seen
that have,
Dead Poets Society? Have you seen any films about boarding schools?
You're talking about fictional characters.
They're
though,
based
and you're-
on
you're
real
making
stuff.
I think there are much better ways to make your argument than the way you're making them. But in essence, I agree with what you're saying.
Okay,
I think it
all right.
holds water.
I'd like to have an argument, please.
Certainly, sir. Have you been here before?
No, this is my first time. Is this the right room for an argument?
I've told you once.
No, you haven't.
Yes, I have.
When?
Just now.
No, you didn't.
Yes, I did.
Didn't.
I
did. Didn't.
I'm telling you I did.
You did not.
Oh, I'm sorry, is this a 5-minute argument or the full half hour?
Oh, just the 5-minute one. I came here for a good argument.
No, you didn't. You came here for an argument.
Well, an argument's not the same as contradiction.
Can be.
No, it can't. An argument's a connected series of statements to establish a definite proposition.
Okay. You're saying that you've had no wounds, or maybe you're saying that, from any of
wounds?
those.
Where are you getting to this?
Well, no, because how could you debate that? Obviously, I've been a victim of stuff like
I'm
that,
not
or
really
I've
debating.
experienced
I'm not really
that.
disagreeing with you.
I'm saying that it's common sense knowledge that people have made the leap from all these artistic representations of life, whether in film, in photography, in plays,
Oh, sure.
in
Art
everything.
represents life. Is that
Yeah,
what you're
no, A, and B, that the origins of it, okay, that most of the origins behind it come from direct suffering of the artist, suffering in some way. Most artists, most critics, artists are generally critics of the society they're in, okay? Most artists are critics. They're looking at society from an angle.
I think that good art resonates with people in a way that represents life and connects with them. And
No, I'm not
connects with their
talking about the
experience of
effect on
life.
other people. I'm talking about the motivation of the artist.
You're talking about the motivation of these hypothetical artists.
Not hypothetical. Look at the stories of any artist.
Any artist.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Story of any artist
Almost
comes
any-
from suffering.
There's
What you're saying.
suffering or being alienated or being marginalized or being misunderstood at the core of every artist person.
Soul whose intentions are good. Oh Lord, please don't let me be misunderstood.
So I have here with me in studio my friend Paul Castiglione. Castiglione. What does Castiglione mean again? I think I've asked you, Paul.
I'm not 100% sure. I've heard it said that it means castle dweller.
Castle dweller. Okay.
That's what I wanted to believe.
I like it.
I want it to mean.
And I've been fighting to get into the castle for a long time, okay? And the gatekeepers won't let me in, but we won't get off on my rants at this moment. We're going to learn a lot about Paul, and there's a lot to learn. And, he's a guy who's got a lot of passion, a lot of idealism. He believes in creating community more than almost anybody you meet. And he believes in the marketplace of ideas, that people having a fair exchange of ideas beyond sound bites. He pursues freedom very strongly. And he's had to break out of certain boxes to pursue that. So talk to us, Paul, about the boxes you've broken out of and the passions that you're pursuing these days.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. So for me, I grew up son of an Italian immigrant, or his parents were immigrants, actually from Sicily. And he struggled. So he was the immigrants, the Italian immigrants, where they would send their kids off to dig up dandelions in the schoolyard. They would shoot squirrels, in nearby fields, to be able to eat. I mean, it was a very practical application of culture. And so I think his relationship with his Italian culture was mixed. I think on the one hand, I think he likes to think of himself as an Italian and all of the beauty in the Italian culture. At the same time, there was a lot of pain in growing up as a poor immigrant.
In what part of the country?
This was in Troy, New York.
Okay.
Troy.
Troy,
Just
upstate
outside
New
of
York.
Albany.
Yes, okay.
And so he worked hard, through school. He got a great job at GE. He worked GE until they sold off his division to a defense contractor, and so he essentially worked out of the same building for 42 years and then retired. And he was very frugal. He saved his money, and for him, getting to a place where he had a stable life, a stable job, a stable home was really important to him. And so to get there, he had very strong ideas. Hard work ethic. Work for a large company. There was just a lot of kind of rules,
right?
Which for me, and I don't know how many of those rules actually came that he actually believed in, and how many I just interpreted from my interactions with him. But all of those rules kind of formed boxes, that I lived in for many years.
Were they like separate silos, or how would you describe the boxes?
Narrow. Well, when I was younger, they were great because I personally benefited by them. By following these rules. I ended up having success in many different areas. Until it got to the place where they're no longer serving me, and then I had to kind of just become aware that I was inside these boxes, and then start to dismantle them. So things like working for a corporate employer, being in a single career field your entire life, and then you retire. Even the concept of retirement, I realized, retire to a golf course. I realized that wasn't, I just picked that up along the way, that,
right.
That was somebody else's dream for me, right. I suddenly realized. So those were a few of the boxes.
Right. When you broke out of the corporate world, which I've heard you talk about, but not in much detail, you've just kind of alluded to it a number of times. Can you tell me just a story or an anecdote or something about the worst parts of that experience? And we're not saying that all of it was bad, but just, pick out something that really was dramatically made it clear to you that you had to get out of that box.
Yeah, there's probably two things I could think of, and it's this juxtaposition of who I was becoming and realizing who I was becoming, and at the same time the kind of the restrictions and even the brokenness of corporate cultures. So one was I was at a really large company that I'd worked for about 10 years, and in the end it became extremely painful for me. And it was in the midst of my divorce, and there was just a lot going on, so there's pain flowing all around me. But I had an exit interview with my boss's boss, and I just asked him, hey, can you give me some advice for the next step along the road? And he says, he said, Paul, you've got the experience, you've got the talent, you've got the skills. He said, but it just seems like you lack the passion. He says, that's all I can offer you. And I thought, yeah, so he was seeing something in me. There was something that was shifting in me that was really helpful for me to be able to put my hands on.
Did you say to him, well, where's the passion in this company? Was there passion in the company that other people had?
Yeah, that's a good question. My feeling is, I felt I had passion for the career that I had been in for many years. And when I think back on it, I'm not sure how much was passion and how much was, satisfaction in finding a place, getting things done or getting paid a lot of money or I don't know. It's hard to separate all that stuff.
Sure.
I'm tempted to judge that there wasn't passion. I will say this. One thing that wasn't there was freedom to be able to bring all of myself to the table, or any of us. Right. Like in meetings, people would come in and they talk about, and I'm going to use a masculine voice. Like it's like, I took a vacation and climbed, in the Himalayas, Right. I mean, that was the most intimate thing that people were willing to share. They didn't come in and say, hey, I'm having,
right.
I'm struggling with my marriage.
Yeah, were you able to talk at all about that when that was going on?
No, no, I don't think I felt safe to share that. I mean, I shared it with a few people. Right. And in fact, in the end, I feel like it came back to really bite me, stuff that I had shared vulnerably.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so when they say you're not sharing your passion in a way, even though that was good advice, as you said, is there some kind of level of hypocrisy in that statement, in the context of the plays?
Yeah, that's really good, because there is this it's almost as if, the expectation is that I could like slice my brain in half, and I bring this analytical, work-oriented perspective, and there isn't really space for this other stuff,
right?
The real life.
Yeah, yeah. And by the way, podcasters out there, listeners, Paul was just actually cutting his brain in half while he was talking about that. But we've put it back together. And so when you think of your own mind and your own soul and everything, you're a complex guy. And what are some of the things you really love about what you're showing to the world now that you weren't showing readily back then?
Yeah. For me, a theme that's been through a lot of my life that I'm putting my hands on more now is this idea of place.
Yeah.
So finding place. So for a lot of my life, I've, kind of pushed, my father's, a very successful man, and he was a foil in certain ways. I idolized him when I was younger, and then, I rebelled against him in many ways later on. It's messy. I've come to learn, like finding my own place and helping others find their place. It's messy.
Yeah.
We're in our culture. My interpretation is we're very clear on what a friend of mine calls vertical thinking. Where there's a goal out there someplace, and here are the 6 steps to get to that goal, and it's just 1, 2, 3, all in a vertical line.
Right.
We don't have a lot of language for what she calls horizontal thinking, which is this idea of, hey, what I want is somewhere out there,
Right.
And I'm waving my hand in a general direction.
Yeah. He hasn't cut his hand at all, by the way, you guys. Yeah.
But I don't really know exactly where it is out there. So then that requires that, or one way to kind of get further definition, in that cloudy area out there is to start multiple pathways. To do something over here on the left and to do something over here on the right, and a few things in the middle, and then as I go, I kind of feel my way that in the direction of the cloud, and then as I get closer to the cloud, it becomes more clear, and then maybe I can identify a single point out there.
So it's kind of like synthesizing a number of different tracks, right?
Yeah, all leading in a direction.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot, and I can readily imagine being asked at a cocktail party, "What do you do? What are you doing? What do you do for a living?" Or at a bar, or a singles matching situation, or a singles meetup or something, and you would try to say more than 3 things or something, and eyes would roll or something. What kind of, have you ever gotten any weird reactions to trying to explain what you're doing these days?
Yeah. Yes, I do. And even now, it's much more defined than it was, in previous seasons of wandering.
Yeah.
But I've used lots of lingo, for trying to define, even for myself, trying to define who I am, business coach, entrepreneur,
right.
Just lots of different things. And also there was a season where I was on sabbatical. And so telling somebody I'm on sabbatical, they might interpret it as being unemployed, and just not, adrift or whatever.
Right.
So I took advantage of that. But it was very intentional. It was very in the beginning it was, I need to be out looking for a job. I got to get on it. Who knows how long it'll last kind of thing. And then I got to the place, a friend of mine invited me to go to the Bahamas. His family had a place down there. And I went down there, and there on this retreat, I realized, no, I could be intentional about this. I don't have to run to the next thing just because somebody tells me I should.
Good.
And so it ended up, part of it was kind of funded from severance, part of it was self-funded. Yeah.
Okay. And you were able to say sabbatical with a straight face.
And ultimately I was able to say sabbatical, yeah.
Straight face.
Yeah.
No, that's excellent. But, and you, by the way, talking about finding your place, you helped me reintegrate back into the Boston area. So Paul has Airbnb, he's an Airbnb host, and then you also turned me on to the Toastmasters group, and then because you're doing this entrepreneurial thing, it also inspired me to work more strongly on what I'm doing.
Thanks.
Talk about the Airbnb just for a moment.
Yeah, that was actually my first successful entrepreneurial pursuit. I've started lots of businesses, and not lots. I started a few businesses, and they've been great learning experiences. I'll leave it at that.
Right.
The Airbnb, I felt, when my daughter went off to college, I recognized I was so worried about her being lonely, or not lonely, but her, not having it, just that she would be prepared to go off on her own.
Oh, yeah.
I was so worried about that. I didn't really think about, what would it be like for her not to be at the house, because
Right.
she lived with me through her high school years. And it like, wow, like it took the wind, it was like knocking the wind out of me. And within 6 weeks, I made the decision to move, to open an Airbnb. She was living with me through high school, and we were living in kind of a condo, 3-bedroom apartment kind of thing out in the suburbs.
Okay.
And that was our home for all the time that she grew up. And then, but when she left, I realized I didn't want to be out in the suburbs any longer. And I wanted to have I wanted life in the home. I didn't want to be,
isolated.
Yeah, and I wasn't dating anyone. I wasn't,
Right.
so, and I wasn't really wanting that to be a primary driver for not feeling lonely.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So you moved to Somerville, bought a house. It's a large house, and you very, very often have people there. Usually 2 or 3 people, I think. Right?
Yeah. It's been great. People from all around the world.
Mention any your most interesting, besides me, your most interesting guests or something.
Oh yeah, besides you.
Right.
Well, I mean, the first set of guests, because it was a huge risk for me. Would the Airbnb, provide enough income in the way that I had envisioned, and all that kind of stuff. So the very first set of guests were a couple from Russia, and they were just lovely. When they left, they ended up giving me gifts,
Wow.
and
really?
yeah.
Oh.
And I've stayed in touch with them actually on Facebook to this day.
Nice.
Another family rented out the whole house one time except for my room, and
From China? Where
no,
were
they
they
were
from?
from Florida actually.
Okay.
He was a park ranger, and it was his mom and his son, and they invited me to play card games with them the nights that they were there. And I just really enjoyed getting to know them. They're just super friendly people.
Nice.
But in general, everybody is very friendly. People are in different places. I had a woman send me a follow-up note via Airbnb. She said, hey, that coaching conversation we had when I was there, she says, it worked out. I ended up moving into this whole new direction.
Whoa. All right, so finding your place, marketplace of ideas, the idealism, and now the strongest passion is this Open Kitchens project. Talk about that. Talk about the refugee women that you're helping, and helping in a lot of ways, and at the same time creating community around food, culture, and open conversation.
Yeah, thanks.
So I'm here with my friend Arthur Gingrandi, who's from Lexington. I've only gotten to know him in the past 6 months, 7 months, and I feel really good guy on many levels. And there's 2 really interesting things. Well, there's more than 2, but there's 2 at least really interesting things about him, fairly unique. One is he became a lawyer in his 60s, and he's in independent practice. In his 60s, he became a lawyer. The second one is he grew up Italian-American, Italian Catholic in the suburbs of Boston, but 35 years ago, he converted to Judaism, and he's very Jewishly proud, also in an ethnic way, too. So it's not just a strictly religious way, but it's really the whole peoplehood stuff. But his stories about these clients that he has are just amazing. And he was keeping us really, really entertained. 3 of us with him on our way to this important international soccer match at Foxborough in middle of May. And here he is with me in studio right now. So Arthur, pick it up from any of those places, but why don't we start with how you went to law school in your 60s? Just a little bit about that.
Right. Well, a lawyer was a profession that I always wanted to be when I grew up, but never got around to it until I became a high-tech software consultant. Indirectly, that got me into intellectual property, the study of intellectual property. Sure. And at age 62, I applied and was accepted to Massachusetts School of Law.
Okay. But as a matter of fact, you've mostly gone into criminal defense law, right?
Right. Yes. It was actually, well, I found law school to be an extraordinary challenge, by the way, at age 62.
I'm sure.
It necessitated that you grow a few new brain cells.
Yeah.
Because you have to read around 100 pages a night.
Right.
But in any event, after graduating, passing the bar in 2 states, in Connecticut and Massachusetts, I took up office space with a former classmate who was an immigration attorney, and she she had a lot of criminal cases that were kind of associated with her immigration cases, because oftentimes, newcomers
often end up getting.
Well, they're not familiar with certain
Right.
law. Like, for example, Haitians and Jamaicans aren't necessarily aware of the laws around gunge and weed.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And so they would be smoking it regularly, and they get
Picked
caught.
up.
And if they picked up with enough of it, it's
Right.
possession with intent to distribute. So in any event, I ended up going into court quite a bit just to take over these cases for my friend.
Your friend, yeah.
And so the rest is history.
You've gotten into a really interesting group of defendants. Interesting in the sense that they're colorful characters and that they really trust you immensely. From you shared a lot of stories and so forth. And I wonder if you can just pick out 1 or 2 guys. And it seems that a lot of it is focused. And I want all of you out in the audience to take out your map. Of course, nobody has maps. Get online, find a map of Massachusetts, zero in on a town. It's not a destination point. It doesn't rival San Francisco. It doesn't rival Los Angeles, Boston, Berkeley, Chicago, New Orleans. It's called Stoneham, Massachusetts, Stoneham. And Arthur's got a colorful Stoneham cast of characters that I'd like to recount for you guys.
Yeah, one of my most memorable clients was a man who was 5 foot 3 inches tall and weighed 350 pounds, and he was quite a character. I was never quite sure how he made his living, because he wouldn't tell me, but I ended up defending him in a number of drug-related cases, which we won. But I got many referrals from this fellow because he happened to be also in the business of contracting, and he had a lot of people that worked for him, and every once in a while they would get into trouble.
Right.
And I guess he wasn't that picky about who he hired, just as long as they could do the job.
Right.
So one of the cases that he referred to me was a case that involved a man who had a very strong work ethic, and he was involved in an altercation, shall we say, at a strip joint, which I won't name, and there are plenty of strip joints in the Boston area, so we're not going to single out anything through any clues or anything. But in any event, it turned out that he was involved in a fight, and it ended up with him getting slashed across, right across his forearm. It was a 14-inch gash with a razor, with a razor sharp knife, and he actually won the fight. He
was bleeding profusely, as you told me. Yeah.
And in the snow, and the meat was hanging from the bone, as we say. Wow. It literally was. It was disgusting, and he had enough adrenaline going through him, or it didn't bother him. He just used his other hand to pummel the guy, and it was quite something. But this fellow was accused of a crime later downstream. I defended him in that case, and we ended up settling with the particular company that was at fault.
Right.
But he later was involved in a number of different cases where I defended him. For some reason, they all involved fighting and knives. I don't know why. But He was always accused of picking up a knife and doing something with it.
And usually in a bar room or something?
Yes, a couple times, but usually at a private residence. I remember, but this guy was funny because he had his own moral code, which I actually respected. Not necessarily the code itself, but the fact that he had one,
Right.
And adhered to it. And for example, he was put in jail for dangerousness. He was there on a dangerousness hearing, and that
You mean
just,
a danger to like,
to society.
oh, right. Not to his like partner or something, like to his wife or something?
No, it wasn't that. It was
Okay.
just that he had gotten picked up for another altercation, shall we say.
Right. By the way, audience, Arthur's putting the word altercation in,
Air quotes.
air quotes. Yeah, we got air quotes going. Yeah, okay.
But so he was. Oftentimes, when somebody is brought up for a violent crime, the prosecution tries to get them jailed immediately. On the notion that
Right.
they're dangerous to society because they're a violent person, and because of his past, the prosecution succeeded. In any event, he called me from his place of residence at the time, which was a maximum security jail
In Massachusetts.
in Massachusetts. And he said, "Arthur, you wouldn't believe what these people are like here." And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "I don't think one of them has worked an honest day in his life."
Has worked an honest day, yeah.
I mean, or even a dishonest day. I mean, he thought they were all lazy bums.
Yeah.
And this guy had an incredible work ethic. He was a damn good worker.
What did he do?
He was a plasterer.
Oh, yeah.
And he could plaster a wall perfectly and
Right.
do all the sand pulling and all that stuff. And he was very good, very efficient. He was kind of a neatnik in a way.
Right.
And I thought that was one of the funniest things I'd heard, because you wouldn't expect that to be the first remark out of
Oh,
the box.
right. That's right. And did he get out? And what happened to him in that case? Well,
In that case there, I think we ended up with a plea agreement. Probably got a quaff, continues without a finding, and maybe 6 or 7 months probation. I think he ended up with a bracelet around his ankle.
yeah.
But he was a pretty memorable guy.
Well, what's the story with Stoneham as an incubator of these criminal defendants?
Well, I just happened to get involved with a package of referrals. And for example, one of them involved an altercation between a client of mine and two people with baseball bats.
Oh, right. You told me that. I want to hear this one. Yes. Yeah.
That came after him because he had actually beat up one of them about 30 years ago in high school.
Oh, right.
And this guy was a big weightlifter and was about 6'3" or 6'4" and about 240, and he was built like a brick shithouse.
Right. I was going to say brick shithouse.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Okay.
And so this client of mine ended up just creaming this guy. Just beat the shit out of him.
Right.
And put him in the hospital that
Like
day.
30 years.
This was 30 years ago in front of the whole high school.
Right.
And so now 30 years later, this guy's son happens to get
That's right.
into an altercation with my client. And when he went home and told his father about it, and by the way, it was not serious. They were just kind of mouthing off at each other.
Right.
This guy went through the roof.
The father did.
The father did, and,
Yeah.
and got a
Baseball.
got a friend, another weightlifting buddy of his, to come after my client, each with a baseball bat. And they approached him at his home, and he came out, and he happened to have a steak knife in his hand of all things, but he tossed it away. Now they claimed that he threw it at them, and that provoked them. But in any event, they ended up trying to clobber him
In front of his house.
right in front of his home.
Right.
And one of them succeeded. They were witnesses to this thing. One of them succeeded, and my client, they hit him right in the back of the head, and he went down flat. And they thought that was the end of it. He springs up just like an Easter bunny or something. Just bang, gets right up, and he says, "Come on, guys, put down the bats and let's have a fair fight." And he's challenging both of them. And they were so aghast they didn't know what to do. He ended up chasing one of them But the other one chased the two of them up the top of a hill, and they ended up regaining their courage, and they broke 26 bones in my client's face, and knocked out his entire top bridge.
But he kept fighting despite that?
Well, yeah, he kept on fighting, but he eventually went down, and they just almost killed him. They left him for dead. But he was probably the toughest client I've ever met.
Whoa!
And
the origin of it was a 30-year back in time fight, and then the son, and so the father's trying to teach. What moral lesson, by the way, is the father trying to teach his son? Yeah, but anyway, yeah.
I don't know. If someone beats you, come back with well armed, something like that.
The bats.
Right. And by the way, the same guy got put in when he was serving his 90-day sentence for dangerousness.
Yeah.
He was set upon by a certain ethnic group.
Oh, in the jail.
In the jail.
Prison. Yeah.
And that's when I found out that there are these places in the jail where they have all of these, hallways and so forth.
Yeah, that are divided, cameras.
But there's usually a blind spot where the cameras can't see what's going on.
Right.
And that's where everybody knows where these are, and they lurk there, waiting to attack a person and have a fight with them.
Right.
And he was set upon by just one person after another, and he beat every single one of them. And they couldn't get the best of this guy. He was just a terror.
And he survived the 30 days, and he got out.
And he survived the 90 days and got out.
90 days, yeah.
I'm not advocating people go to jail and do that type of thing, but there are some people you can't help but admire.
Oh, yeah. So, Arthur, you wanted to say something, a kind of a postscript about that a little bit, about your work with people who are having a lot of challenges, let's say.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the postscript to the story about the guy that got all of his teeth knocked out and 26 bones, almost beat to death, was that we decided we would go after his two assailants in a civil case. And when it came to actually testifying against him, it was a suit. Actually, it was a criminal suit. It was the state versus these three guys because they got into a big fight.
Right.
And
the three guys, including your client,
including my client.
Okay.
And so they all did what we call a Fifth Amendment party. They went and they just all took the fifth.
Right.
End of with no witnesses, no complaining witness, nothing.
Right.
That was the end of it. However, we then opened up a civil case against these
two
guys.
Yeah.
And my client ultimately refused to testify against them.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, why? Why on earth? And we'll call this guy, just for the record, the guy that he ultimately beat 30 years hence.
Yeah.
30 years ago.
Previous,
prior. We'll call him Joe.
Okay.
And he said, Joe and I, he said, we've known each other since we grew up together in Stoneham. And he said, this guy, I was once in a fight with about, 10 or 15 other guys that jumped me. And Joe saw that I was in trouble. He came in between the two of us. We licked them all, and we escaped.
That was back like 30 years before.
And that had happened maybe, 10 years ago.
Okay. Right.
And so it occurred to me that he had this code that he didn't want to violate.
Right.
But it was kind of weird because these two guys had literally tried to kill him and left him for dead, and yet the code was strong enough. He didn't want to rat somebody out, or who knows exactly how you could formulate this code. But there was some bond there that prohibited him from testifying.
But he didn't tell you up front, though. It was like after you had already tried to start.
No,
the case.
I was convincing him all the way.
Okay.
And I'm convinced that on the QT, that they settled out of court for a certain sum of money, maybe $1,000 or something.
Right.
Quick money for him, and he didn't have to include me in it. Could have been like that. You never know.
Right.
You can't always believe your clients.
Right. That's right. That's right. That's a good point. And Johnny says.